This is Germany in 1918. Their last chance to overrun the Allies to finalize the war failed, and an overpowered American army landed in Europe, making their already exhausted army even more desperate. Due to a British naval blockade that had been going on for the entire war, Germany suffered food, medicine, and clothing shortages, making the war a living hell for its troops and its civilian population. I also forgot to mention that the most severe pandemic in recent history, the Spanish flu or 1918 influenza, was raging across the German Empire, killing an estimated 250,000 Germans. By 1918, Germany was desperate. This motivated General Ludendorff to advise the Kaiser to create a new civilian government, as he believed that Germany could possibly be treated more fairly if it became more democratic. The Kaiser listened and tried to create a parliamentary monarchy led by Prince Max based on Reichstag support. This failed as it was not democratic enough. On October 31st, 1918, the Kiel Mutiny occurred, as sailors refused to go on a suicidal attack against British ships. Many other soldiers and civilians joined this mutiny and refused to continue the war any further. By late 1918, the Kaiser lost hope and control of the army, as mass strikes and riots continued. On November 9th, the Kaiser abdicated and escaped to the Netherlands, never to return to Germany again. That same day, Prince Max handed over the chancellorship to SPD leader Friedrich Ebert, and Germany, for the first time, was declared a republic. Armistice was finally signed on November 11th, 1918, marking the end of the war. In January 1919, the victors met in Versailles to discuss what to do with Germany and its people. Germany was not invited. This is what Germany lost. Alsace-Lorraine was allocated to the French, North Schleswig was lost to the Danish, Eupen-Malmedy was given back to the Belgians, Memel was lost to Lithuania, and a Polish corridor was created to separate East Prussia from the rest of Germany. The industrial heartland of the German Empire, the Sark coalfields, and the port city of Danzig became a free city under the control of the League of Nations, to which Germany was not invited to. The Allies also demilitarized the Rhineland and confiscated all German overseas colonies. These territorial losses meant that 12% of the German population was lost. Germany also lost 75% of its iron ore, 68% of its zinc ore, and 26% of its coal. During the treaty, the Allies agreed that Germany had to pay back war reparations, which added up to £6.6 billion. Army restrictions were also set on Germany that prevented it from owning any tanks, air force, or submarines, and limited its number of battleships to 6. The German army was limited to a total of 100,000 men. However, what annoyed the German people the most was Clause 231, which forced Germany to accept the blame for starting and prolonging the war. Many saw this as unfair and insulting. After the SPD gained control of the government in the 1919 elections, they held their first meeting in the town of Weimar, hence the name of the new government. The first thing that they did was set up a new constitution, and this is how it worked. At the bottom, there's the people. Everyone who was over 20 could vote. The people elected the Reichstag, whose deputies were elected based on proportional representation. These representatives were elected every 4 years. Over the Reichstag were the Chancellor and his ministers, who proposed laws to the Reichstag. The Chancellor is appointed by the President, who was elected every 7 years by the people. The President also commanded the army and could dissolve the Reichstag and arrange new elections. The President also possessed a new power named Article 48, which in case of an emergency gave the President full dictatorship-like powers. I'm sure that won't cause any problems in the future. Was this constitution good? The advantages of this constitution were that it had fair and equal representation for everyone over 20 years old. There was a balance of power and a constant rotation of leaders. Some disadvantages was that proportional representation led to too many parties that struggled to agree and cooperate. Proportional representation also allowed extremist parties that didn't believe in democracy to have a say and possibly be able to get power. And finally, Article 48 gave too much power to the President in case of an emergency. The Treaty of Versailles left Germany in crippling debt and also took away its money-making industry. This meant that Germany owed a lot of money and didn't have any way of paying it back. By 1922, all the money produced by the government was being paid straight back to the Allies. The lack of reparations being paid made the French impatient, who in 1923 occupied the Ruhr with an army of 60,000 men. This was a catastrophe for Germany, as it lacked sufficient army and the Ruhr produced 85% of its coal. This stunt didn't go well for the French, as German workers in the Ruhr went on strike and refused to work. As time went by, the number of soldiers increased to 100,000. The occupation lasted until 1925. The German government, running even more desperate and even more in debt, decided to print more money to pay back its reparations quicker. This made the situation worse, as printing more money causes something called inflation, which makes money worth less. The German government printed so much money that it caused hyperinflation. This lowered the value of the mark tremendously, which increased extreme poverty and made the middle class disappear. Years of economic and political instability led to 3 significant attempts to overthrow the Weimar government. The first one was the Spartacist Revolt, which was a communist revolution attempt led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. The revolution was not strong or organized enough to work and was stopped by the government with the help of the Freikorps, who were ex-soldiers and military volunteer units. The next attempt was made by the Freikorps itself, who turned on the government and marched on the streets. The overthrow was led by Wolfgang Kapp, but the revolt was stopped as workers went on strike and marched in the streets, which stopped the Freikorps. The last and closest attempt was the Munich Putsch, which was organized by an unknown man named Adolf Hitler and the much respected General Ludendorff. On the 8th of November 1923, Gustav Ritter von Kahr, the Bavarian Prime Minister, was addressing a room full of businessmen in a beer hall in Munich. Out of nowhere, Hitler disrupted the room accompanied by 600 stormtroopers that surrounded the beer hall and screamed,
Die Nationalrevolution hat begonnen!
He took Kahr and Lossow, the Bavarian army officer, into a side room, holding them at gunpoint. Meanwhile, Hitler had commanded the rest of his stormtroopers to terrorize other members of the Bavarian government in different locations around the city, but they were not able to control any army barracks. Back at the beer hall, Hitler was becoming more desperate and threatened to shoot both ministers and himself if they didn't agree to pack him up. They reluctantly agreed, and were forced to announce their support for the putsch in front of everyone. After this, Hitler mistakenly let Kahr and Lossow go, but remained with Ludendorff to plan the overthrow of the government and marched to Berlin the next morning, unaware that Kahr had tipped off the government. The next cold morning, Hitler and Ludendorff led an army of 2,000 men to a military base in the center of Munich. Ludendorff was confident that the police and the military wouldn't shoot at their former commander, but he was dead wrong. As the Nazis marched, they were met by armed police and Bavarian soldiers who immediately shot at them. Hitler, stunned by the commotion, fell to the ground and dislocated his shoulder. He was able to escape, but was caught 2 days later and imprisoned. General Ludendorff continued to march, but he was arrested right after. The Munich Putsch resulted in 3 dead policemen and 16 dead Nazis. So what do you think? Was the Treaty of Versailles too rough on Germany? How strong was the new constitution? Was the Weimar Republic at a threat? Thanks for watching, and please consider liking, subscribing, and watching more videos.